The movie begins in space, where the starship Avalon is on autopilot en route to the colony world of Homestead 2. The ship is carrying 5,000 passengers and crew who are in hibernation pods for the 120-year journey. However, 30 years into the voyage, the ship encounters a meteor storm, causing a power diversion and a collision with a large meteor. This event triggers a red alert and indicates that something has gone wrong. James Preston, a mechanical engineer, unexpectedly wakes up from his hibernation pod. A friendly computer voice informs him that they are nearing Homestead 2 and advises him about the temporary confusion and weakness often experienced after hibernation. Following the computer's guidance, James is directed to his cabin to rest. Attending an orientation session about life on Homestead, he realizes he is the only participant, and the computer-generated instructor fails to comprehend his inquiries about the absence of others. Unable to find assistance from the information kiosk in the main concourse, James locates an office to send a message to the Homestead Company, despite the expected high cost. He reaches out for help, only to discover that it will take 55 years for him to get a response. Realizing he is on his own, James starts exploring the ship and comes across manuals for various equipment, including the hibernation pods. Unfortunately, he cannot figure out how to reactivate them after someone has awakened. James is also unable to access the crew pods or the command area due to insufficient clearance granted by his wristband. James encounters Arthur, a robot bartender with whom he can converse, but Arthur is programmed to provide only generic advice. James, classified as a general class passenger, decides to break into a suite with better amenities to improve his living conditions. As time passes, James experiences increasing loneliness despite making use of the ship's entertainment facilities. He contemplates suicide by opening the airlock without a spacesuit but stops himself and rushes into the pod area. In a fortuitous stumble, he encounters Aurora, an attractive woman in one of the pods. James reads her recorded passenger profile, discovering she is a journalist traveling to Homestead to document the adventures and motivations of colonists. Intrigued by her stories, he grapples with the moral dilemma of waking her up, knowing that it condemns her to a life and death on the ship. However, unable to bear the isolation any longer, James manually activates Aurora's pod, hiding before she regains consciousness. Aurora awakens the following day, finding herself alone until she meets James in the Grand Concourse. He reveals the truth about his extended wakefulness but conceals the fact that he woke her up. James has requested Arthur, the robot bartender, to keep this information from Aurora, and Arthur agrees. James and Aurora engage in daily conversations, discussing potential solutions to fix the malfunctioning pods. As Aurora adjusts to her new circumstances, she engages in activities like swimming, running, and writing her story. As a gold-class passenger, Aurora utilizes her status to access better meals for breakfast compared to James's standard clearance. She inquires about James's decision to leave Earth, and he explains his passion for building and fixing things, contrasting Earth's throwaway culture with his desire to construct a home with his own hands. After spending time together and growing closer, James asks Aurora on a date, and she accepts. They enjoy a meal together before venturing into the spacesuit room, donning suits, and going outside the ship. Upon returning inside, Aurora expresses her excitement, and they further explore their newfound intimacy in James's cabin. They find happiness in their routine of exercise, stargazing, and taking advantage of the ship's entertainment and dining options. Another year elapses, and on Aurora's birthday, James plans a special surprise by crafting a ring for her. However, during a conversation with Arthur at the bar, Aurora inadvertently reveals that she and James have no secrets. Arthur assumes that James has informed her about waking her up. Aurora is devastated and furious, demanding that James stay away from her. One night, she enters his cabin while he is asleep and physically assaults him. James attempts to explain himself over the ship's intercom, but Aurora accuses him of robbing her of her life. Meanwhile, the control room receives increasingly frequent alerts of system failures, which James and Aurora also notice in smaller incidents, such as malfunctioning cleaning robots. 2 years after the meteor collision, Gus, a deck crew chief, unexpectedly wakes up and appears on the concourse. He explains that the hibernation pods have never failed before and senses a significant problem. Gus's wristband grants them access to the command center, where they discover that the ship's automatic diagnostics have failed, necessitating a manual check of every deck. While Gus conducts tests, a gravity failure occurs, nearly causing Aurora to drown in the swimming pool. Investigating further, Gus realizes that cascading failures have occurred, with a timeline indicating that the initial failure took place 2 years earlier. The subsequent failures caused power diversions to rebalance the load, but the accumulating strain led to further malfunctions, endangering the entire crew and passengers. The first area affected was the main engine section, but a manual inspection is required to pinpoint the source. At this point, Gus collapses, and James and Aurora rush him to the infirmary, placing him in the medical auto-diagnostic scanner. The scan reveals multiple necroses throughout Gus's body, indicating imminent death due to a malfunctioning hibernation pod. Prepared to face his fate, Gus dons his uniform and entrusts James and Aurora with his wristband, enabling them to access the necessary areas of the ship to resolve the problems. In the engineering section, James and Aurora discover a breach caused by a meteorite that affects critical systems. While opening a door, Aurora nearly gets pulled out due to a hull breach but manages to block it with a tablet pushed by James. James uses a liquid sealant to reinforce the seal, pressurizing the area. They realize that the fusion engine exhaust must be manually vented, as the manual override fails to work. James must don a spacesuit and venture outside to fix it. In a risky move, he enters the exhaust passage to hold a flap open, allowing the manual venting to function. Despite Aurora's desperate pleas over the radio, she eventually pulls the lever, causing James to be propelled out into space when his tether snaps, and his suit sustains a puncture. James bids farewell to Aurora. Determined not to lose James, she dons a spacesuit and searches for him. She manages to retrieve him by grabbing his tether and brings him back inside. Unfortunately, James is unresponsive. Aurora drags him to the infirmary, where the auto doc pronounces him dead. Using Gus's wristband and override code, Aurora convinces the machine to resuscitate James successfully. He regains consciousness, and Aurora feels immense relief and joy. Time passes, and life on the ship returns to normal. James works on repairing the auto dock and informs Aurora that he discovered a command override that could put her back into hibernation in the infirmary. However, doing so would mean James remaining alone once again. In a choice that demonstrates their love and commitment, Aurora decides to stay awake with James, embracing a life together on the ship. 88 years later. As the voyage concludes, the captain and crew awaken to find a transformed Grand Concourse. The area is now teeming with lush vegetation, trailing vines, birds in flight, and even a cabin that may house James and Aurora's grandchildren. Aurora's voiceover accompanies the scene, narrating her story to the awakened passengers and explaining how they managed to create a fulfilling life while the rest of them were asleep. Remember to like this video, and subscribe to this channel for more movie recaps.